The edge of extinction. The year was 2387, and humanity stood on the precipice of oblivion. For 17 years, the Terran Alliance had waged a desperate war against the Xeric Imperium, an ancient civilization whose vast fleets had conquered a third of the Milky Way. The Xerics were ruthless conquerors, driven by biological imperatives to expand and consume. Their hive-mind consciousness allowed them to coordinate massive assaults with terrifying efficiency, striking simultaneously across multiple fronts without hesitation or mercy. Earth's outer colonies had fallen one by one. New Eden, Proxima Centauri, the Ta Ceti settlements, all gone. Billions dead or enslaved. The remaining human worlds huddled behind the Orion defense line, a network of fortified star systems that formed humanity's last barrier against extinction. Military analysts gave humanity 18 months before total defeat. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of Orbital Station Aegis, her weathered face reflected in the reinforced glass as she gazed at the immense structure being assembled in the shipyards below. Even at 53, with silver streaks running through her dark hair, Vasquez carried herself with the bearing of someone who had never accepted defeat, not in the Battle of Proxima, not in the Ta Ceti evacuation, and certainly not now. "Is it ready?" The voice belonged to General Marcus Chen, who stepped onto the deck with the careful movements of a man who had spent too much time in low-gravity environments. His right arm, a cybernetic replacement after the Battle of Barnard's Star, gleamed under the station's lights. "As ready as it will ever be," Vasquez replied, not taking her eyes off the construct below. "The Colossus will launch tomorrow." Chen moved beside her, his breath fogging the glass. "They're saying it's a waste of resources, that we should have built 20 standard battleships instead." 20 standard battleships wouldn't change a damn thing, Vasquez said, her voice sharp. "We've lost 300 ships in the last year alone. The Xerics would just add 20 more kills to their tally." Below them, construction drones swarmed around the most ambitious military project in human history. The Colossus of the Void stretched nearly 5 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull composed of quantum-locked alloys and adaptive nano-armor. Unlike the sleek, practical designs of standard Terran vessels, the Colossus was a behemoth that defied conventional naval doctrine. An armored fist rather than a surgical scalpel. "How many people know about the Crucible Drive?" Chen asked quietly. Vasquez's jaw tightened. 7, including us. The engineering team had their memories selectively wiped after installation. She finally turned to face him. "If the Xerics ever discovered what we've built." Chen nodded solemnly. The Crucible Drive wasn't just a revolutionary propulsion system. It was a potential superweapon that violated 3 different interstellar treaties, a calculated risk born of desperation. "The crew?" he asked. 8,000 personnel, each personally vetted. "The best we have left." Vasquez's voice softened slightly. "Many volunteered knowing this is likely a one-way mission." Chen's cybernetic hand flexed unconsciously, and Captain Reynolds, still the only choice for command. Her tactical simulations against Xeric battle patterns are unmatched. Vasquez paused. "Though I'm still not convinced she's entirely stable after what happened at New Eden." "None of us are stable after New Eden," Chen replied grimly. "But she survived more direct engagements with the Xerics than anyone alive. That counts for something." The next day, Captain Sophia Reynolds stood on the bridge of the Colossus, her tall frame rigid as she surveyed her command center. The bridge sprawled around her in concentric circles, designed to remain operational even if sections were damaged or destroyed in battle. Tactical, navigation, weapons, communications, each station manned by the best specialists the Terran Alliance could provide. Reynolds had selected her senior officers personally. Commander Jackson Wu as XO, a brilliant tactician whose family had died in the fall of Ta Ceti. Lieutenant Commander Diana Okoro as weapons officer, whose innovations in quantum targeting had briefly given human forces an edge 3 years ago. Chief Engineer Marcos Reyes, whose unorthodox modifications to standard drives had saved countless evacuation ships. Final systems check complete, Captain, reported Wu from his station. All sections report ready for launch. Reynolds nodded, her ice-blue eyes scanning the holographic displays floating around the bridge. The ship hummed with energy. Reactors, shields, weapons systems, all coming online in sequence. The culmination of humanity's remaining industrial capacity and scientific knowledge, compressed into one vessel. Open shipwide communication, she ordered, her voice steady. The communications officer nodded. Channel open, Captain. Reynolds looked up, addressing not just her crew but history itself. This is Captain Reynolds. In moments, we will depart on humanity's most crucial mission. I won't lie to you. Our odds are slim. The Xeric Imperium has pushed us to the edge of extinction, and conventional tactics have failed us time and again. But the Colossus was not built for conventional warfare. She paused, letting her words sink in. Each of you was chosen because you've demonstrated the qualities that define humanity at its best. Adaptability, ingenuity, and unyielding determination. The Xerics fight as a hive mind, but we fight as individuals united by choice. That is our strength. Throughout the massive ship, 8,000 crew members listened. In engine rooms and weapon bays, in medical sectors and fighter hangars, they absorbed their captain's words. Our mission is to strike directly at the heart of the Xeric fleet in the Theta Persei system. Intelligence reports their primary command node has gathered there, coordinating the final push to breach our defenses. We will destroy that node or die trying. Reynolds' voice hardened. Make no mistake, this is likely a one-way mission. But if we succeed, we give humanity a fighting chance. Not just to survive, but to reclaim what we've lost. She looked around at her bridge crew, meeting their eyes one by one. It has been the highest honor of my life to serve with you. Now, let's show the galaxy what humanity is capable of. Reynolds out. As the communication closed, Lieutenant Commander Okoro spoke quietly. That was quite the speech, Captain. Reynolds' mouth tightened into something approximating a smile. Just stating facts, Lieutenant Commander. Launch sequence. Aye, Captain. Docking clamps releasing. Maneuvering thrusters online. The massive warship separated from the orbital station with surprising grace, its thrusters firing in carefully calculated sequences to guide the behemoth away from Earth's orbital infrastructure. Main engines standing by. Chief Engineer Reyes reported from engineering. Crucible drives spooled and ready on your command. Reynolds took a deep breath. Engage standard drives. Half power. Set course for the Theta Persei jump point. The Colossus surged forward, accelerating away from Earth. In the observation deck of Station Aegis, Admiral Vasquez and General Chen watched it depart. God help them, Chen murmured. God help us all if they fail, Vasquez replied. The journey to the edge of the solar system took 3 days, during which the crew ran continuous drills and final system checks. Captain Reynolds rarely left the bridge, catching short periods of sleep in her ready room, while Commander Wu oversaw operations. As they approached the jump point, Reynolds called her senior staff to the tactical room adjacent to the bridge. A 3-dimensional map of Theta Persei system rotated slowly above the conference table. Latest intelligence, Reynolds said, manipulating the display to highlight a massive concentration of ships near the system's 5th planet. The Xeric command node, their equivalent of a flagship, is coordinating from this position, surrounded by approximately 200 warships. 200. Lieutenant Commander Okoro whispered. Even with the Colossus's firepower, we're not going to engage the entire fleet conventionally, Reynolds interrupted. That would be suicide. Instead, we're going to exploit what may be the only weakness in Xeric tactical doctrine. She zoomed in on the command node, a massive spherical structure surrounded by a cloud of smaller vessels. The Xerics operate on distributed consciousness, but their primary coordination still requires enormous processing capacity. That's concentrated in their command nodes. Intelligence suggests a direct strike on this node will temporarily disrupt their entire battle network. Wu frowned. Their defensive screen is impenetrable by conventional means, Captain. Which is why we won't be using conventional means. Reynolds nodded to Chief Engineer Reyes. Reyes cleared his throat. The Crucible drive isn't just a propulsion system. When properly configured, it generates a quantum disruption field that interferes with the subspace frequencies the Xerics use for hive mind communication. Our plan, Reynolds continued, is to execute a targeted jump directly into the heart of their formation, activate the Crucible's disruption field at maximum intensity, and fire everything we have at the command node before they can adapt. A heavy silence fell over the room. That's, Wu began, then reconsidered his words. An extremely high-risk strategy, Captain. It's the only strategy with any chance of success, Reynolds replied firmly. We get one shot at this. The Crucible drive will burn out after the disruption field is activated, leaving us with standard engines only, which means no retreat, Okoro said quietly. Reynolds met her gaze steadily. Exactly. We either succeed or we don't come back. The mood on the bridge was tense as the Colossus approached the jump point. Final preparations were made, systems locked down, and the crew secured for what promised to be the most violent spatial displacement ever attempted by a human vessel. Crucible drive at full capacity, reported Reyes from engineering. Coordinates locked for precision jump. All weapons systems armed and ready, Okoro added. Quantum torpedoes primed for immediate launch upon arrival. Reynolds sat in the command chair, her posture unnaturally still. Engage Crucible drive on my mark. She paused, thinking of Earth, of the colonies already lost, of everything riding on this desperate gamble. Mark. The universe seemed to fold around the massive warship. Unlike conventional jump drives which created a controlled wormhole, the Crucible drive briefly phased the entire vessel into a higher dimensional state, allowing it to reappear at precise coordinates regardless of gravitational interference. For a heartbeat that felt like eternity, the Colossus existed everywhere and nowhere. Then reality reasserted itself with violent force. They materialized exactly where intended. In the midst of the Xeric fleet, less than 10,000 kilometers from the command node. The sudden appearance of a 5-kilometer human warship in their formation caught the Xerics completely off guard. Crucible disruption field active. Reyes shouted over the comms. Xeric communications disrupted. All weapons, fire at will. Reynolds commanded. Target the command node. The Colossus unleashed its arsenal, quantum torpedoes, plasma lances, kinetic accelerator rounds, all striking the suddenly vulnerable command node. Without their coordinated defenses, the massive structure's shields fluctuated erratically. Direct hits confirmed, Okoro reported, her voice tight with controlled excitement. Command node shields at 60% and falling. On the tactical display, the surrounding Xeric vessels showed signs of confusion, their movements becoming erratic as the disruption field interfered with their hive mind connections. They're adapting faster than we anticipated, Wu warned, pointing to several larger vessels beginning to reorganize. Estimate 3 minutes before they restore sufficient coordination for a counterattack. Reynolds nodded grimly. Divert all available power to forward weapons. We need to finish this now. The Colossus shuddered as it absorbed the first retaliatory strikes from the recovering Xeric vessels. Shield indicators flashed warnings across multiple sections. Maintain fire on the command node, Reynolds ordered calmly despite the chaos. Nothing else matters. The bridge rocked violently as a concentrated barrage from 3 Xeric cruisers struck their port side. Damage reports flooded in from multiple decks. Port shields failing, the defensive systems officer reported. Sections 42 through 57 reporting hull breaches. Seal those sections and continue firing, Reynolds commanded. Status of the command node. Their shields are at 18%, Okoro replied. One more concentrated barrage should do it. Reynolds leaned forward in her chair. "Give them everything we have left." The Colossus's remaining weapon systems fired in perfect synchronization, their combined energy focusing on a single point in the command node's weakening shields. For a moment, it seemed insufficient. Then the shields collapsed entirely, and the barrage tore into the structure itself. The command node erupted in a series of cascading explosions, its massive form breaking apart as secondary detonations rippled through its core. On the Colossus's bridge, a ragged cheer went up from the crew. "Command node destroyed," Okoro confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "Repeat, Jarek command node destroyed." Throughout the surrounding fleet, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Ships veered off course, some colliding with each other. Weapon systems fired randomly or not at all. The perfect coordination that made the Jarek so formidable had been shattered. But the Colossus's victory came at a terrible cost. The massive warship was crippled, its crucible drive burned out as predicted, standard engines damaged by enemy fire, and hull integrity compromised across multiple sections. "Damage report," Reynolds ordered, wiping blood from a cut on her forehead. Wu consulted the flickering displays. Critical damage to 40% of the ship. Casualty reports still coming in, but estimated at over 1,000. Engines operating at 27% capacity. Weapons systems at 35%. Reynolds nodded slowly, absorbing the information. And the Jarek fleet? In disarray, but regrouping. The loss of their command node has severely disrupted their coordination, but they're adapting. Multiple vessels are converging on our position. Reynolds stood, surveying her damaged bridge, and the determination still evident in her crew's faces. The mission had succeeded. They had struck the critical blow that might give humanity a fighting chance. But now they faced the second, unspoken part of their mission: survival. "Set course for the nearest jump point," she ordered. "We're not finished yet." As the damaged Colossus limped away from the devastation it had caused, the surviving Jarek vessels began a chaotic pursuit. The battle had only just begun, but for the first time in 17 years of war, humanity had seized the initiative. The edge of extinction had been pushed back, for now. Forged in fire, the Colossus limped through space, trailing debris and venting atmosphere from its wounded sections. 3 days had passed since the devastating strike against the Jarek command node, and Captain Sophia Reynolds had not left the bridge except for brief visits to critical damage zones. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, but her focus remained unwavering. "Status report," she demanded, studying the tactical display where a dozen Jarek pursuit vessels were visible at extreme range. Commander Wu looked up from his console, the strain evident in his usually composed features. "Engineering reports the main engines are stabilized at 31% capacity. No improvement possible without major repairs. Life support is functioning in 62% of the ship. Medical reports 1,247 casualties minus 418 confirmed dead, the rest injured with varying severity." Reynolds absorbed the information with a slight nod. "And our weapons? Particle cannons at 40% capacity. Missile tubes 1 through 12 operational. Quantum torpedo launchers destroyed. Point defense systems at 73% and holding." Lieutenant Commander Okoro approached with a data tablet. "We've been analyzing the Jarek pursuit patterns, Captain. They're different, less coordinated than we've ever seen them." Reynolds examined the tactical data. The Jarek vessels were indeed behaving unusually, moving in smaller groups rather than with their typical hive mind precision. Some ships had even broken off pursuit entirely. "The destruction of their command node affected them more profoundly than we anticipated," Reynolds mused. "They're not just disrupted, they're fragmented." Wu frowned. "But they're still pursuing us, and we're still in no condition to fight." "No," Reynolds agreed, "but we might not need to." She turned to communications. "Any response from Alliance Command?" The communications officer shook her head. "Still nothing, Captain. The quantum relay was damaged in the battle. We're limited to conventional transmissions, which won't reach Alliance space for days." Reynolds stood, wincing slightly at a pain in her side, an injury she concealed from the medical staff. "Then we make our own decisions," she addressed the navigation officer. "Lieutenant Park, what's our closest potential refuge?" Park consulted his charts. "The Erebus Nebula, Captain. Approximately 22 hours at our current speed. Its radiation and gravitational anomalies would make pursuit difficult." "For us as well," Wu pointed out. "We have better sensor technology than the Xerics, and we only need to hide long enough to effect critical repairs." Reynolds made her decision. "Set course for the Erebus Nebula, maximum sustainable speed." As the massive warship altered course, Chief Engineer Rice arrived on the bridge, his uniform stained with coolant fluid and his face haggard from days without proper rest. "Captain, I need to speak with you privately," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. Reynolds led him to her ready room, the door sealing behind them. "What is it, Chief?" Rice placed a small device on her desk, activating it to create a localized dampening field against surveillance. "I've completed the full diagnostic on the crucible drive. And it's not completely burned out as we expected." Rice ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "The primary matrices are intact. With some reconfiguration, we could restore approximately 60% functionality." Reynolds leaned forward. "Enough for another jump?" "No." Rice shook his head. "Not for propulsion, but potentially enough to generate another disruption field on an even larger scale." Understanding dawned in Reynolds' eyes. "A weapon. The most powerful one humanity has ever wielded," Rice confirmed grimly. "If we reconfigure the remaining matrices to focus purely on disruption rather than spatial displacement, we could potentially create a field that would permanently sever the Xeric's hive-mind connections within its radius, turning them into individuals," Rice finished. "Based on our observations of damaged Xeric vessels in previous encounters, they become significantly less effective when isolated from the collective. Some even shut down completely, as if they don't know how to function autonomously." Reynolds paced the small room, weighing the implications. "How large a radius are we talking about?" "Theoretical calculations suggest up to 2 light-years with our remaining capacity." Rice hesitated. "But Captain, there's something else. The reconfiguration process would create an extremely unstable energy signature, one that the Xerics would detect immediately." "We'd be painting a target on ourselves," Reynolds concluded. "A very large one. Every Xeric vessel within sensor range would converge on our position." Rice met her gaze steadily. "And the reconfiguration would take approximately 16 hours to complete." Reynolds was silent for a long moment. "How many people know about this possibility?" "Just me and my senior technicians. 5 people total." "Keep it that way for now." Reynolds deactivated the dampening field. "Continue your analysis. I need concrete numbers on feasibility and potential effect radius before I make any decisions." As Rice left, Reynolds remained in her ready room, staring at the stars through a small viewport. They had already accomplished their primary mission, dealt a critical blow to the Xeric command structure. By all reasonable standards, their duty now was to bring the Colossus and its surviving crew home. But if what Reyes suggested was possible, her thoughts were interrupted by the door chime. "Enter." Dr. Eliza Chen, the Colossus's chief medical officer, stepped inside. Unlike most of the crew, her uniform was immaculate, a psychological tactic she employed to maintain a sense of order amidst chaos. "Captain, you've been avoiding my medical staff," she said without preamble. "I've been busy keeping this ship functioning, Doctor." Chen approached, medical scanner in hand. "You have 3 cracked ribs and a mild concussion. You're no good to this ship if you collapse." Reynolds reluctantly allowed the scan. "Treat it quickly. I need to get back to the bridge." As Chen applied a regenerative patch to Reynolds' side, her expression grew serious. "The crew needs more than medical treatment, Captain. They need hope. The rumors are spreading that we've accomplished our mission, but we're too damaged to make it home. What do you suggest, Doctor? I can't lie to them. No, Chen agreed. But they deserve to know what their sacrifices have achieved. The destruction of the command node wasn't just a tactical victory. It was the first significant blow against the Xerics in years. The crew needs to hear that from you. Reynolds considered this as the medication took effect, dulling the pain in her side. You're right. Schedule a shipwide address in 2 hours. When Reynolds returned to the bridge, the tactical situation had changed. Lieutenant Commander Okoro approached immediately. Captain, we've detected unusual energy signatures from the pursuing Xeric vessels, she reported. They appear to be communicating with each other using conventional transmission methods rather than their usual subspace frequencies. Reynolds studied the sensor data. They're adapting, developing alternative coordination protocols. Yes, but these methods are far less efficient, Okoro pointed out. Their response times are delayed by seconds rather than milliseconds. It's giving us an edge in evasion. An edge we desperately need, Reynolds murmured. She turned to communications. Prepare a tight beam transmission to Alliance Command. Encrypt with Protocol Omega 7. The communications officer worked quickly. Ready, Captain. Reynolds dictated her message. To Admiral Vasquez, Terran Alliance Command. Colossus mission successful. Xeric command node destroyed. Significant enemy fleet disruption confirmed. Ship sustained heavy damage. Proceeding to Erebus Nebula for emergency repairs. Request extraction support if possible. Be advised, Xeric's adapting to command loss with conventional communication protocols. Vulnerability window estimated at 14 days maximum. Strategic strikes recommended immediately. Reynolds out. She knew the chances of the message reaching Alliance territory before they reached the nebula were slim, but protocol demanded the attempt. More importantly, if the Colossus didn't survive, at least some record of their discovery about Xeric adaptation might make it back to Earth. 16 hours later, the massive warship entered the outer boundary of the Erebus Nebula. The swirling clouds of ionized gas and dust immediately began interfering with their sensors, and, more importantly, with the Xeric's ability to track them. Cut engines to minimum power, Reynolds ordered. Passive sensors only. Let's disappear. The Colossus drifted deeper into the nebula, using occasional bursts from maneuvering thrusters to guide it toward a particularly dense cluster of stellar matter. The pursuing Xeric vessels hesitated at the nebula's edge, several attempting to enter before retreating due to navigation difficulties. They're establishing a perimeter, Wu observed, watching the tactical display. They know we're in here, but they can't pinpoint our location. Which gives us time, Reynolds replied. She opened a channel to engineering. Chief Reyes, you have a green light for all repair operations. Priority 1 is restoring maneuverability, followed by weapons systems. Understood, Captain. Reyes responded. Request permission to begin crucible drive diagnostics as discussed. Reynolds paused, aware of the bridge crew's curious glances. Approved. Keep me updated hourly. As repair operations commenced throughout the ship, Reynolds finally delivered her address to the crew. Standing in the ship's largest intact meeting area, with video feeds carrying her image to every functioning terminal on the vessel, she spoke not as a commanding officer, but as someone who shared their burden. We have struck a blow that many thought impossible, she told them, her voice steady and clear. The destruction of the Xeric command node has created the first significant disruption in enemy operations since this war began. Alliance forces now have a window of opportunity to launch counteroffensives across multiple fronts, while the Xeric struggle to reorganize. She acknowledged their losses directly, naming several fallen officers and crew members whose actions had been particularly heroic during the battle. Their sacrifices, and yours, have given humanity its first real hope in this conflict. For that alone, whatever happens next, the mission of the Colossus is already a success. The crew's response was subdued but resolute. They had known the risks when they volunteered, and seeing tangible results of their efforts renewed their determination. 3 days into their hiding operation, with repairs proceeding around the clock, the situation changed dramatically. Lieutenant Park detected unusual energy signatures at the nebula's edge. "Captain, the Xeric vessels are transmitting some kind of scanning pulse into the nebula," he reported. "It's unlike anything in our databases." Reynolds frowned. "Can they detect us with it?" "Not precisely, but they seem to be narrowing down our location. They shifted their formation to concentrate on this sector of the nebula." Wu studied the readings. "They're learning, adapting their technology to overcome the nebula's interference." "How long before they can pinpoint our position?" Reynolds asked. "At current progression, approximately 12 hours, Park estimated." Reynolds made her decision. "Commander Wu, Lieutenant Commander Okoro, Chief Engineer Rise. My ready room. Now." Once assembled with the door sealed, Reynolds activated the security field. "We're out of time for conventional repairs. Chief Rise, status of the Crucible drive reconfiguration." Rise looked uncomfortable. "We've made progress, but we're still at least 10 hours from completion. And there's another problem." He produced a data tablet showing energy readings. "The reconfiguration is generating more secondary radiation than anticipated. Even within the nebula, the Xerics will detect it once we enter the final phase, leading them directly to us before the weapon is operational." Wu concluded grimly. Reynolds paced the small room. "Then we need a diversion." Okoro leaned forward. "The fighter bay in Section 38 is still operational. We have 12 fighters intact with full weapon loadouts. A dozen fighters against that Xeric fleet would be suicide." Wu objected. "Not if their mission is diversion rather than engagement," Reynolds countered. "We outfit them with modified sensor buoys programmed to mimic the Colossus's energy signature. They deploy the buoys in different sectors of the nebula, drawing the Xerics away while we complete the reconfiguration." "It could work," Okoro said thoughtfully. "But those pilots would be volunteering for an extremely high-risk mission." Reynolds finished. "I won't order anyone to do it." Within an hour, more than 30 pilots had volunteered. Reynolds selected the 12 with the most experience navigating nebular environments, personally briefing them on their critical mission. "You'll launch simultaneously from different points around the ship," she instructed. "Each of you has been assigned a specific vector and deployment zone. Once your buoys are active, avoid engagement and attempt to rendezvous at these coordinates." She displayed a location deeper in the nebula. "The Colossus will send a shuttle to retrieve any survivors once the operation is complete." The lead pilot, Lieutenant Sophiadize, spoke for the group. "And if the retrieval becomes impossible, Captain." Reynolds met her gaze directly. "Then you've given the rest of us, and humanity, the chance we need." As the pilots prepared for their mission, Reynolds was confronted with another crisis. Commander Wu requested a private meeting, his expression grave. "We have a security breach," he reported once they were alone. "Someone has been transmitting coded messages from within the ship." Reynolds stared at him. "To whom?" "The encryption is sophisticated, but the quantum fluctuations match known Xeric communication patterns." Wu's voice hardened. "We have a saboteur on board, Captain, possibly a sleeper agent." "How long has this been happening?" "We've detected 3 transmissions over the past 18 hours. The latest was just before the Xerics began their new scanning pattern." Reynolds felt ice forming in her stomach. The implication was clear. Someone was helping the Xerics find them. "Do we know the source?" "We've narrowed it to Section 42, but the transmissions are being routed through multiple systems to obscure the exact origin point. Lock down that entire section. Discrete security teams, no ship-wide alerts. I don't want to tip off our saboteur." Reynolds' expression darkened. "And I want everyone with access to our Crucible drive plans identified and monitored." As Wu left to implement her orders, Reynolds felt the weight of command more heavily than ever before. Not only was her ship damaged and hunted, but now the enemy had infiltrated their ranks. The fighter diversion had become even more critical. 6 hours later, the 12 fighters launched in perfect synchronization from different points around the massive warship. Each immediately engaged stealth protocols and vanished into the nebulous swirling clouds. On the bridge, Reynolds watched their progress on tactical displays. Status of the Crucible reconfiguration. Entering final phase, Rise reported from engineering. The energy signature is becoming more difficult to mask. Estimated completion in 4 hours. Just as he finished speaking, alarms blared across multiple stations. Jarek vessels are on the move, Okoro reported urgently. They've detected something, and they're splitting their forces. Reynolds watched as the enemy fleet divided into smaller groups, each pursuing different targets within the nebula. The diversion was working, but not completely. 3 Jarek heavy cruisers were still holding position near the Colossus's actual location. They're hedging their bets, Wu observed. Pursuing the decoys but keeping a presence here in case it's a trick. Before Reynolds could respond, security alerts flashed on her console. Commander Wu report. Wu checked the security feed. We've located the saboteur, Captain. Lieutenant James Harlow from Quantum Systems. He barricaded himself in auxiliary control when security approached. He's locked down that entire section. What can he access from there? Main power distribution, secondary weapons controls, and Wu's face paled slightly. The Crucible drive monitoring systems. Reynolds stood. I'm going down there. Captain. That's an order, Commander. You have the bridge. Armed with a pulse pistol and accompanied by 2 security officers, Reynolds made her way through damaged corridors to the sealed doors of auxiliary control. Chief Engineer Reyes met them there, his expression grim. He's bypassed the security lockouts, Reyes reported, and he's attempting to access the Crucible drive controls. I've initiated emergency isolation protocols, but he's good. He's getting through them one by one. Reynolds approached the intercom panel. Lieutenant Harlow, this is Captain Reynolds. Stand down immediately. There was a moment of silence before a response came. I'm afraid I can't do that, Captain. Harlow's voice was calm, almost regretful. You don't understand what you're interfering with. Then explain it to me. The Jareks contacted me 3 years ago. They showed me the truth. This war is unnecessary. They don't want to destroy humanity. They want to integrate us, make us part of something greater. His voice took on a fervent quality. I've experienced their collective consciousness, Captain. It's beautiful. An end to isolation, to the pain of individual existence. Reynolds exchanged glances with Reyes. You've been compromised, Lieutenant. The Jareks have used neural manipulation techniques on you. No. Harlow's voice sharpened. I made this choice freely. Humanity is doomed to extinction unless we join them, don't you see? The Colossus was never meant to save humanity. It's the perfect weapon to destroy any chance of peaceful integration. Reynolds signaled to